Hey, this is Taylor Gray, Ezra Bridger from Star Wars Rebels, and you are listening to the Jedi Temple Archives podcast. Taylor Gray and Ezra Bridger say out.
Ezra, please, get out of there!
I can't do that. It's up to all of you now. And remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Welcome to episode 26 of the Jedi Temple Archives podcast.
There is more knowledge here than anywhere else in the galaxy. Only members of the Jedi Council are allowed access. Guarding the holocrons is one of the most important duties a Jedi can be given. Do you think you're up to the task?
Fans, and welcome to another episode of the Jedi Temple Archives podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and we are recording this episode on Monday, September 9th, 2019. We're actually recording a couple episodes this week as I'm going to be out in Southern California visiting Disneyland Park next week, and that is basically when I'm going to be dropping this episode. So in the interim, we're just going to go ahead and get this recorded. We're going to not have any news on this particular episode as it's going to be pre-recorded, and I am joined once again by my good friend and co-host, Tom. Tom, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Rob, and it's always good to be with you here on the Jedi Temple Archives podcast.
Awesome. And I'm really looking forward to meeting up with you and Michelle next week and getting a chance to finally experience Black Spire Outpost there on the lovely planet of Batuu.
We are very excited for it as well. I know you're going to really love it once you finally get to experience it for yourself. And we are excited to be there with you for your first journey to Batuu.
Yeah, we were just talking a little bit before we started recording that it's going to be a little closer to Mustafar than Batuu, maybe out there at the park on the Saturday that we're going to be in there together. But it's still going to be a great experience and really looking forward to checking out all the detail that they put into that land. So if you are interested in hearing a little bit more about that experience, I plan on putting together an episode, not necessarily the first week that we're back. I already have another episode planned with Tony and his boys over at the Disney Discussions podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about different generations and how they've come to Star Wars. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But probably that next week, we're going to go ahead and do sort of our review of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge out there at the Disneyland Resort.
Yeah. Should be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a scorcher the first day you're out there, so it truly will be bright suns while you're in Black Spire Outpost.
More like on the sun, I think, but
yes,
we will endure, as we always say, for the children. So for this week, the topic that we are going to start delving into is really something that is not addressed within any of the films of the Star Wars kind of pantheon, not during the prequels, not during the original trilogy, and certainly not during the current sequel trilogy. So it is about the rise of the rebellion, or the Rebel Alliance, as most people know it. And certainly, we see the rise of the Empire within the prequel films by the end of Revenge of the Sith. And when we get to even Rogue One and the original Star Wars, which is now titled A New Hope, the rebellion is already established. So if you're coming from just a film perspective, you don't get to see how the Rebel Alliance kind of forms. If you are familiar with the animated series, then you get a little bit more background for how that comes together. And really what we're looking to do today is kind of bring everyone up to speed on how the Rebel Alliance kind of evolved over the course of the reign of the First Galactic Empire and how they became the Rebel Alliance that we see when we watch that original Star Wars film.
Yeah, if you have just seen A New Hope, or even if you've watched Rogue One, it would seem like the Rebel Alliance was pretty unified and ready to go and already battling in full force the Empire at that time. But it came from a lot of different locations, a lot of different small factions, and it had to be brought together by a unifying force to make this work and make it stand as you see it in the films.
Right. And one of the really interesting things about the evolution of the rebellion is that if you go back and look, it's really during the Clone Wars era that Anakin Skywalker was really kind of instrumental in the birth of the rebellion. It happened on the planet of Onderon. And there was a group of rebels there that were fighting back against the separatists that had claimed their planet. And this was a group of people that included both Saw Gerrera, who we do see in both the Clone Wars, Rebels, and certainly in Rogue One, if you're familiar with the films. And at the time, his sister, Steela Gerrera. So Anakin and Obi-Wan were sent there. Ahsoka Tano was also included along as Anakin's Padawan in this training of these Onderon rebels. And what they were doing was not necessarily fighting the war for them, but showing them how they could effectively fight that war as a rebel cell against an occupying force.
Unfortunately, the only way to reclaim Onderon will be through armed struggle. But we lack sufficient hardware and supplies.
Onderon is in your king's rule, and at the outbreak of the Clone War, he chose to align it with the Separatists.
Our true king has been silenced. The one you recognize as a traitor and a separatist minion. We need your help to survive this.
Find a way. We shall.
We await your answer.
There are pockets of rebels on many of these planets that just need guidance. With training and resources, they could attack soft targets while the Republic continues to engage them on the battlefield.
That sounds like terrorism, Anakin.
Well, I think of it as an insurgency, to help realign these planets with the Republic.
We can divide the Separatist forces and press them on two fronts.
A means to an end. Fear cannot be. Stop those who spread terror. The Jedi must.
Indeed. What you're suggesting would open up dangerous possibilities, and we must not train terrorists.
Rebels.
How we conduct war is what distinguishes us from others. Funding rebels to overthrow a legitimate government puts innocent lives at risk.
We can minimize collateral damage by using arms that mainly affect droids.
The least we can do is help them defend themselves. Test the tactic while we're at it.
This could be a great new weapon for us.
Train and observe. Send advisors, we will.
I'll assemble a team.
I'm going with you.
What? You don't trust me?
Too much. That's what worries me. A bit rough around the edges, wouldn't you say?
That's why I brought Rex here.
They're not exactly what I would call shiny, sir, but I can work with them.
Skywalker, at your service. This is General Kenobi, Commander Tano, and Captain Rex.
We're looking forward to taking the fight to those scrapping droids.
Yes, all in good time.
Saw Gerrera.
He fashions himself as our leader, though no one elected him.
Well, for now, we're in charge. And there is much to learn. The Separatists have strength in numbers. We're gonna show you how to target and destroy them.
Now, to be clear, we are not here to fight your war. Rather, to show you how to conduct it in the most efficient and successful way possible.
Captain Rex.
I'll show you how the 501st destroy clankers. First, I need volunteers to carry supplies from our entry point a half-click west.
Shouldn't be a problem.
Excellent.
Yeah, which was exactly what was happening on their planet. They had taken out their leader, installed their own leader within this planet, and they wanted to fight back against this situation. And so Stila Guerrera actually kind of took over as this rebel cell's leadership group, aided by, of course, Anakin and Ahsoka kind of training them along the way. And they fought back. And yes, that was the very beginning from what many people will know of the Rebel Alliance.
Yeah. And it was also interesting because I think people who are familiar with Saw Gerrera, specifically as it relates to Rogue One, he seems to be in charge of that. Well, they're not really part of the Rebel Alliance at that point. They're more extremists. They're more considered to be almost terrorists. But he is clearly in charge of that group. And certainly, as Tom mentioned, when you see them on Onderon and they're getting assistance from Anakin and Obi-Wan, Stila is actually the person that takes control of that group. And certainly she was probably the more level-headed of the two. And it almost is unfortunate that events in the Clone Wars play out the way they do. And she ends up not leading that group because, she certainly would have been someone who probably would have kept her rebel cell reined in, I guess, a little bit and in a position where they could have aligned with Mon Mothma and the rest of the Rebel Alliance.
And I think, the loss that Saw feels from this, along with many other things that come along in his lifetime, kind of drive him to be this paranoid force that you see when you watch Rogue One, a Star Wars story. He is definitely on the side of the rebellion, but he wants to take action. He doesn't want to have diplomacy be part of it. He's fighting very militaristically, or actually very, like you said, Rob, very much in a terrorist form against the Empire, but that's what he sees as needed to be done to get across what he wants to see as far as the rebellion. But, the bottom line is when you watch that film and you see Jyn Erso running off with Cassian Andor as Jedha is being destroyed, he still says, save the rebellion, save the dream. So he at heart wants to see the rebellion succeed.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting with Saw Gerrera because I think we're probably at some point going to do an entire episode on him. He's a very complex character. He really is kind of littered through both the Clone Wars animated series as well as Star Wars Rebels, and we certainly see him within Rogue One. But there's an interesting parallel in a lot of ways between him and Anakin in the sense that what you see with Saw is his extremism kind of proceeds as he loses more and more of his humanity, as he is replaced more and more by machine parts. And that is certainly something that we see with Anakin as well.
Yeah, there was no coincidence that when you heard him sort of using his breathing apparatus in Rogue One, that the sound effect for it was very similar to that of Darth Vader's breathing apparatus. It was very similar, and that definitely Gareth Edwards was trying to create that feel when they made that film for sure.
Yeah, I also think that probably anyone with teenagers would kill for their own Bor Gullet. Certainly be able to get to the truth of the matter is something that any parent would like. Although the madness portion is probably a little beyond the pale.
I don't know. There's plenty of people who have children that would also understand, like, the madness already exists. Why not go for it?
Exactly. So, the interesting thing about the birth of the rebellion is that Anakin is so closely tied to that. And as we see, the rebellion certainly becomes a thorn in the side of both Anakin and his role as Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine as well. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I should also mention that for the purposes of this podcast, we are really just talking about the rise of the Rebel Alliance. And we're only going to take this up to the events of the episode A New Hope and the Battle of Yavin, because really the Rebel Alliance at that point morphs into, the Battle of Endor, they morph into the New Republic and become kind of a different entity. And we'll get into that in a separate episode.
Yeah, there's really so much depth there. And it's also much of it. there is plenty of stuff and plenty of stories that happen in between the actual films of the original trilogy. But most people don't know, and I think that's why it's great that you're bringing this subject up, Rob, is where the Rebel Alliance came from, how it emerged into the force that it was. And, it had its struggles from the beginning and even through the original trilogy films. And it really is a very interesting subject. And I'm sure we will touch on more of it as we get into other episodes of the Jedi Temple Archives podcast.
Absolutely. And, we've certainly talked about Rogue One on the Hyperion Adventures podcast in your series about Star Wars Remembered. And one of the things that I really do love about that film is that up until that point, you end up with this kind of polarized view. The Empire is all bad. The rebellion is all good. And Rogue One is not afraid to deal with the fact that really it's all shades of gray. You've got these members of the rebellion that have been fighting since, they were children and saw these horrors, and that's what inspired them to act. But in the process of rebelling against the Empire, they've committed acts that are, in some cases, probably just as heinous as the things that the Empire had done. The only difference being that they were doing them in an effort to kind of free the galaxy from this tyranny, as opposed to, it's kind of ratcheting down this control over the galaxy.
It's war. I mean, no matter what you believe is your rationale, whether you are on the correct side or whether you aren't, you're going to do things that are probably not seen as exactly what you would want to have as your focus. You're going to be doing things. Yes, we are good. We are doing good things, but that doesn't mean we don't have to do bad things to accomplish the greater goal eventually.
Yeah, and the greater good is certainly a theme that always kind of ends up rearing its head in war in those types of scenarios. So, but to get into a little bit of the information about the early formation of the Rebel Alliance, certainly at the time that the Clone Wars were going on, and Emperor Palpatine at the time, or Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, really at that point in time, had gotten his emergency powers from the Galactic Senate and was in the process of trying to wrest even more control from the Senate. There was a lot of discontent amongst the senators at that time, and they ended up signing a petition of 2000, is what it was called, which it basically was something that expressed the concerns of those who signed it with Palpatine's rule, and kind of called for him to relinquish his emergency powers as soon as possible, because they could see in many cases that it was headed down a road where he could become a complete dictator. And as we find out, he becomes the emperor of the First Galactic Empire.
Yeah, if you remember from Revenge of the Sith, you heard, I believe it was actually from Obi-Wan, that he mentioned that, he's had this role longer than his term limits were supposed to allow him to have it. You can see him gaining more power as he moves along. That there was reason behind this. And so, yes, this was brought up by Bail Organa and Padme Amidala and Mon Mothma to kind of, hey, let's put the brakes on this. We can't have this guy continue to be in this kind of power, because we see this going in completely the wrong direction from what we knew as the Old Republic.
Right. And one of the interesting things about it was that, despite the fact that Palpatine took control of the Republic and made it into the First Galactic Empire, he didn't immediately dissolve the Senate. And of course, with the politicians involved, all kind of acting in their own self-interest, there was a period of time there where the Empire really flourished, because there was so much maneuvering going on politically that there was no one who was willing to unify and do what they needed to do to stop Palpatine from grabbing even more power onto himself.
Right. And keeping the Senate intact was kind of an illusion of what he wanted it to look like and how he could keep the systems kind of in place. So they're not rebelling immediately against him by keeping it like, yeah, we still have your senators here. You are still represented. I'm the emperor. Yes. And I make the final decisions, but I still listen to all of you. Finally, when they built the actual Death Star, he's like, okay, don't need you anymore. So that's when he completely got rid of the Senate, because that was an intent on how he was going to keep these systems from rebelling against him at that point.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, we've all seen scenarios where someone takes a hostage in order to make people around them do whatever it is that they're looking for. And in that case, I mean, with the Death Star at his beck and call, he was essentially taking, it's one thing to say, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill your child, or I'm going to kill your wife or your husband, or whatever the case may be. But in this case, it was, I'm going to kill everyone on your entire planet. And it was certainly an excellent, leverage for him against those who were interested in rebelling against him. And it really does speak to the fact that you look at Leia Organa particularly, she was able to watch the death of her entire world and still maintain the focus that was necessary to kind of stay the course and do what she could to make sure that the rebels were going to be victorious in the end.
If anything, it steeled her resolve that much more, having to witness that in front of her, as traumatizing as that had to be. But you could tell that, look, I see what this is. It doesn't surprise me. I'm shocked by this at the same time, but it doesn't surprise me coming from this emperor who has done terrible things across the galaxy, that this would happen, and we need to make sure that it does not continue.
Absolutely. So in the early days of the rebellion, you're looking at a situation where instead of there being this large organized rebellion against the Empire, there were these smaller cells of individuals that were rebelling. They were staying isolated from each other. And as we kind of come to find out later on, specifically in the book Ahsoka and then into Star Wars Rebels, that really the one of the primary agents behind the organization of the early rebellion was Ahsoka Tano, who we've talked about in detail in prior episodes, as Fulcrum, who was kind of a secret intelligence role that she took on in concurrence with Bail Organa and his rebellion against the Empire.
I met you once, for a few moments. I don't even know your name.
His name is Senator Bail Organa.
And the crews of the blockade runners?
Members of other rebel cells.
There are other cells.
We're a cell? Wait, did you know we were a cell?
No.
We weren't supposed to meet. That way, if captured, we couldn't reveal the other rebels to the Empire. That was the protocol.
The protocol has changed.
Fulcrum.
Ahsoka. My name is Ahsoka Tano.
Why did you come here?
Because of you and your apprentice. Many in this system and beyond have heard your message. You gave them hope in their darkest times. We didn't want that hope to die.
So what happens now?
I don't know. One chapter has closed for you, Ezra Bridger. This is a new day. A new beginning.
And then later on, it evolved into more of a formal alliance when they joined up with Mon Mothma and her forces prior to the actual declaration of rebellion against the Empire that was later issued.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, it needed a big step from a big personality like Mon Mothma to bring all these groups together into this alliance, because, yes, there were a lot of rebel cells, but they were working on their own, doing their own thing, not really working together. So they needed somebody like Mon Mothma to take the reins and show them, look, we are stronger together than we are separate. And that's essentially what she did.
Yep. And one of the cool things about Star Wars Rebels in particular is that well, there's a lot of people who maybe haven't seen that animated series, and certainly Tom and I have talked it up ad nauseum on prior episodes of this podcast. But one of the things that really makes that such a great series is that it is really focused around one of these early cells of what would eventually become the larger rebellion. It was a group that referred to itself as the Spectres, and it was consisted of Hera Syndulla, who was kind of the leader of the group and the captain of the ship called the Ghost, as well as Kanan Jarrus, who was a Padawan who had escaped the Jedi Purge, whose Jedi Master Depa Billaba had sacrificed herself so that he could live. You had Garazeb or Zeb Aurelios, that is a character who is a Lasat, but he is actually one of the early concept drawings for Chewbacca within the original trilogy, which is kind of an interesting little twist. And then you've got other characters like Sabine Wren, who is a female Mandalorian, kind of a teenager, but also a weapons specialist in a lot of ways. And then they join up later by Ezra Bridger, who is one of the key members of that group, and another Force sensitive that Kanan gets together with and begins training, and their droid Chopper, who, once again, you've got another scenario where Star Wars does a genius job of developing another one of these droids that just takes on a personality all its own, and you just can't help but get attached to it.
Yeah, Chopper, talk about a personality all his own. He is, I don't know, maybe he's R2-D2 if he's, not slept in a couple nights or whatever, because he's always kind of on edge. He's got a little anger to him. But, when it's all said and done, Chopper comes through more often than not. Another fascinating character. And also, if you haven't seen Rebels, you may have seen him. He makes a small appearance in Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
Yeah, and there's a number of times as well that you can see the Ghost within Rogue One, which is kind of a cool little Easter egg. I thought there were only one or two places where you could see it, but the more I watch that film, the more I catch spots where you get to see a little glimpse of it here, a little glimpse of it there, either on the landing pad at the Yavin 4 Masasi Temple base, or within the scene where the rebellion arrives over Scarif. And there's a number of places where you can kind of see it flying through the battle there. So, and the other thing that is noteworthy here is that within Rogue One, during the period of time where they're kind of gathering their forces to head to Scarif, you can kind of hear over the loudspeaker that General Syndulla is being called, and that is Hera Syndulla that we get to know within the Star Wars Rebels series.
Yeah, it was actually an interesting little tidbit when that came across, because Rebels was still in production at that time. We had no idea what had happened to that crew at that point. You just know that you had not seen them anywhere in the original trilogy film. So you didn't know if they, something was going to happen to them up ahead of that. So when these announcements were taking place immediately right before A New Hope, you realize, okay, that they still exist, that whatever's going to happen in the future of Star Wars Rebels as they wrap that series up, that at least some of these characters have made it through to this point anyway.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about that is that kind of to the same effect, there has always been this thought, those of us who watched the original trilogy right when it came out, we took it at face value that Luke was really the last of the Jedi within the galaxy. And if you watch some of these animated series, and I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want to ruin anything, but there is certainly the possibility that there are other Jedi floating around out there in the galaxy, or other Force sensitives that may have had some minor bit of Jedi training. So that may very well end up playing into Luke and kind of putting together the Jedi Academy again within the sequel trilogy. I don't know if they're going to really go into that a whole lot, but I'm certainly hopeful that that is something that gets explored at some point.
Yeah. We've talked about Ahsoka Tano many times on this show. I'm not going to spoil anything really about her throughout these animated series, except for what we've already done, of course. But there are others just like her that, yes, maybe they were around, maybe they weren't quite tied in with the Jedi at that moment. Maybe they were on the fringe, but there's bound to be more stories to be told out there for those that kind of escaped Order 66, at least to begin with.
Absolutely. So one of the other bits of information that we want to throw out there is that, so within Star Wars Rebels, we start with this group that are known as the Spectres. They're a small rebel cell. Eventually, they join up with a larger subset of the overall rebellion. And this is even prior to Mon Mothma bringing the full Rebel Alliance together. But there is a group known as Phoenix Squadron. And that was a group that was run by a commander named
Yun Sato.
Yep, Yun Sato, who, again, was one of these people that was gathering some of these smaller cells onto himself and starting a larger movement. So they fold into Phoenix Squadron and undertake a number of missions alongside Ahsoka Tano during this period of time, which leads up to the Siege of Lothal. And Lothal, for those of you who have caught it in prior episodes that we've mentioned, is the home planet of Ezra Bridger and is kind of a center point for a lot of the activity within Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of interest into this place that you wouldn't expect. It's a planet you've never really heard of much, throughout Star Wars yet. There was a lot of interest in this planet, and a lot of fascinating stuff happened here, and it was a good reason why they had a rebel cell emerge out of this group, because the Empire was really coming down on them hard.
Yeah. The other kind of fun little bit of trivia that occurs while they're part of Phoenix Squadron is that the Rebels undertake a mission where they are able to acquire some prototype B-Wing starfighters. And I bring those up because those are something that was featured pretty prominently in this most recent trailer for The Rise of Skywalker. They're the blade wings, so they're kind of a flat profile until they open up their attack foils, and when that happens, they look kind of like a lowercase t. But the cool little tidbit about those fighters is that they were designed by a Mon Calamari engineer named Quarry, and that is a reference back to Ralph McQuarrie, who was really the person whose artwork drove a lot of the original Star Wars film. And you can certainly, if there's anything that you love visually within Star Wars, you could probably trace it back to the hand of Ralph McQuarrie.
Yeah, not only did it drive the artwork, you actually will see it if you go into and watch some of the original trilogy. They did a lot of, as they were developing technology, this was before CGI, even with George Lucas adding a lot of that on the special editions and such. But if you look at a lot of the backgrounds, some of them are made up from matte paintings that are made directly from McQuarrie's work. So, you can see it when you watch these films.
Yeah, and Ralph McQuarrie, along with people like Burt and the sound design that he did, are people that I still don't feel like get enough props in regards to Star Wars. But it is really their work that drives. John Williams, certainly for his music, has been recognized ad nauseum. But some of these people who were in maybe less famous roles within the Star Wars production department certainly have contributions that you can't imagine Star Wars without the sounds that you hear, be it the characters or be it the lightsabers or whatever the case may be. That would all be at the feet of Ben Burt, but certainly all of the visuals that you see really were a collaboration between the mind of George Lucas and then the hand of Ralph McQuarrie.
Right. And then just the special effects alone, they were so ahead of their time when this all started back in 77. And you look at the emergence of Industrial Light and Magic and how it's actually just taken over and is the premier special effects unit in film. As a matter of fact, many films that aren't dealing with Lucasfilm or Disney or whatever else use Industrial Light and Magic because they are always top notch. And that started way back in 77.
Yes, certainly. And so really getting back to our storyline here, one of the things that occurs during the period of time where the Spectres and the characters that we come to know within Rebels are working with Phoenix Squadron is that Thrawn, who we've also discussed in prior episodes, is eventually dispatched to deal with this group of rebels. And in the process of doing so, he is tasked with getting rid of this rebel cell out around the area of Lothal. But he really has kind of a more grand mission in mind, which is to not only deal with them, but to eliminate the rebellion altogether. So he does allow some kind of minor victories by the members of Phoenix Squadron. They are able to get away with a group of Y-Wings that certainly play into the events of what we see within A New Hope. But ultimately, what Thrawn is looking to do is to track down the core group of the rebellion and to eliminate them and thus really remove that threat from the Empire.
Yeah, he's not looking for small wins. He's looking for large wins. Obviously, he does want to, wear this group down, but more than anything else, he wants information on how he can bring down the entire rebellion, not just one little cell.
Right. So eventually events play out where Mon Mothma is being transported or being escorted by the members of the Ghost, and she ends up being the one who ultimately from the Ghost is responsible for issuing the declaration of the Rebel Alliance. And she resigns from the Senate and brings together the forces kind of under one group. And that takes place at Dantooine.
This is Senator Mon Mothma. I've been called a traitor for speaking out against a corrupt galactic Senate. A Senate manipulated by the sinister tactics of the Emperor. For too long, I've watched the heavy hand of the Empire strangle our liberties, stifling our freedoms in the name of ensuring our safety. No longer, despite Imperial threats, despite the Emperor himself, I have no fear as I take new action. For I am not alone. Beginning today, we stand together as allies. I hereby resign from the Senate to fight for you, not from the distant halls of politics, but from the front lines. We will not rest until we bring an end to the Empire, until we restore our republic. Are you with me?
Look! They came! Look how many there are.
This, my friends, this is our rebellion.
Another great tie-in to the original trilogy and the fact that Princess Leia kind of throws that out there as a location of the hidden Rebel base. There is actually some serious significance as far as the Rebel Alliance goes to the planet of Dantooine.
What a move by Mon Mothma to, basically commit a giant act of treason. She'd been kind of working under the radar to this point to make these things happen, but she decided, look, we need to get this together. I need to be the unifying force. So she goes onto the Ghost and does make this announcement, steps away from the Senate, realizes, look, I can't do anything with the Senate anymore, but I can do something by rallying the troops and forming this one giant rebel alliance. And it's, Mon Mothma is another character that you probably should go more in depth into, because she deserves so much credit for what happened with the Rebel Alliance and eventually what, we assume happens with the New Republic.
Yeah. And I think, in a lot of ways, she's getting some recognition kind of off the cuff by Disney with the announcement of the new Halcyon Star Cruiser and that Star Wars hotel that's being put together, because that is the product of what they refer to as Chandrila Star Lines, essentially. And that is the home planet of Mon Mothma. So certainly that is a character that we will dive more into as we get into more topics kind of down the road. The other character that is tightly tied to Mon Mothma and the gathering of the rebellion is another character that we do actually get to see in the films, and that's Jan Dodonna, who is General Dodonna, who is the person that actually gives Luke and the rest of the pilots the debriefing when they're about to go attack the Death Star within Episode 4.
The battle station is heavily shielded and carries a firepower greater than half the Starfleet. Its defenses are designed around a direct, large-scale assault. A small, one-man fighter should be able to penetrate the outer defense.
Pardon me for asking, sir, but what good are snub fighters going to be against that?
Well, the Empire doesn't consider a small, one-man fighter to be any threat, or they'd have a tighter defense. An analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia has demonstrated a weakness in the battle station. The approach will not be easy. You're required to maneuver straight down this trench and skim the surface to this point. The target area is only 2 meters wide. It's a small thermal exhaust port right below the main port. The shaft leads directly to the reactor system. A precise hit will start a chain reaction which should destroy the station. Only a precise hit will set up a chain reaction. The shaft is ray shielded, so you'll have to use proton torpedoes.
That's impossible, even for a computer.
But it's not impossible. I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than T-meters.
Then man your ships, and may the Force be with you.
Yeah, he played a huge role right from the beginning of kind of being the architect of the rebel, fighting force of designing the plans to try and, how we're going to approach and attack the Empire. And he deserved, another great sort of under the radar character that deserves a lot of credit for what became the eventual Rebel Alliance.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't want to go into too much more detail on the remainder of the storyline within Star Wars Rebels, because there is a lot of spoiler information there that, kind of major items that I'd prefer to stay clear of. But it does bear noting Thrawn as a threat to the rebellion is something that we never see play out. So that is clearly resolved in some way, shape, or form within the events of Star Wars Rebels. I would certainly recommend that people go out there and check that out. We've already laid out in prior podcasts what an important character he is and what a master tactician. And I'm certainly hopeful that we'll get to see more of Thrawn, hopefully in a little bit more of a supporting role as opposed to a role where he is set against the members of the Rebel Alliance or the New Republic or even the Resistance as it now plays out within the sequel trilogy. But needless to say, all of this plays into the events of Rogue One. And for those of you who are familiar with that movie, that does center around Jyn Erso and her father, Galen Erso, who was responsible in many ways for a significant portion of the creation of the first Death Star. And that whole storyline really is about how the rebels do get a hold of those plans that Darth Vader is trying to track down within Episode 4. So if you have not seen Rogue One, again, another piece of Star Wars film that you absolutely should go check out. It's an ensemble cast. It's not about the Sith and the Jedi per se, but it does tell a great story within the overall arc of Star Wars.
Yeah, all based on the original crawl from the original Star Wars, of course, A New Hope, because it discusses that the Rebel Alliance just basically got their first major victory, and that is what happened, what transpires within Rogue One. And it's a really fascinating film and some interesting things that kind of lead directly into A New Hope. I now consider it like you have to watch them both together, because I just feel like it's, as much as Star Wars, A New Hope was, the original, but now it's like they almost seem like they're one fully functioning film together. And also, when we were talked about so many things about, Star Wars Rebels, and if you haven't seen that, there are so many little Easter eggs. Yes, you have dropped a few out there, Rob, discussing the ghost, and that Chopper makes an appearance, and you get the call for General Syndulla and everything. But there are so many other references that are within the Rebel series that just kind of come across subtly in that film, that it really, if you go back and you go watch Rebels, you're going to pick and choose and find all these little knickknacks within that film that are going to enlighten you that much more and give you just that much more joy when you watch it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, that's really what inspired me to do this podcast in the first place, was the fact that there are so many references that get made if you dig into some of this other content and some of these other stories, that when you do go back and you can rewatch the original trilogy, or you can rewatch any of the sequels, or you can rewatch the prequels, and there are things that you pick up by kind of digging into some of this other content that really does elevate the story that you're getting. And certainly we've talked about it in regards to the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith, and getting that deeper understanding of just who Anakin Skywalker was and how sad his fall was, which you do get a bit of that watching the films, but to understand the depths of his fall based on the heights that he'd risen to as a Jedi, and that it wasn't about wanting to do evil. It was all for good reasons. It was just that it became twisted, and it was issues with himself that he just could not deal with. But when you do get to engage, I guess, in some of that other content, and you do get some of those little Easter egg references, it just opens up entire other doors in the films that you think you've picked every little detail out of.
Yeah. The one thing about Star Wars, and I think that we've all been through this as Star Wars fans, where people wonder why you're so involved in Star Wars, why you like these, outer space movies so much. But it's not just these outer space movies. There is so much depth to this universe, and there's so much cross-pollination within it, and that you can really delve deeply into it and really enjoy it. And the more this reference material that you take in, and it really just expands the world even that much more for you. And I even include now going to the planet of Batuu, into Black Spire Outpost, as you're about to do coming up this weekend, Rob. There's that much more to delve into once you get to that area. So it's great. Not only can we get it from, of course, the films, but also the animated series, now the books, the comics, and now actually a place you can visit. It is really a wonderful place to be, and it is exciting each day. It's more and more exciting to be a Star Wars fan.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see, as you mentioned, once that Star Wars hotel opens, and the events of what transpires kind of on Batuu, how much of that actually is truly going to be canon. My understanding is that much of it is going to be considered canon. And once again, it's just going to give us some additional context for things that we think that we already know, or things that we've seen and kind of thought that we'd pulled every detail out of. So again, I'm pretty confident that most people have already seen the original trilogy. We're not going to go into too much detail here with that. I do think that I want to do an additional episode down the road where we kind of talk about what happens after the Battle of Endor, leading up to the beginning of The Force Awakens, so people can kind of understand how the rebellion eventually merged into the New Republic, and what precipitated the First Order rising and destroying that New Republic, as we saw in the events of The Force Awakens. So that is for another time. Certainly, if there's anything we overlooked or any major details, please feel free to reach out to us. You can do that via email at jtapodcast@gmail.com, or on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest at JTA Podcast. And if you do want to get some more perspective on some of these films, as I mentioned earlier, the Hyperion Adventures podcast, Tom's podcast, along with his lovely wife, Michelle, has been doing a series called Star Wars Remembered. And we have had the privilege of actually joining them on that show to kind of break down some of the films. I think our next one is going to be Empire Strikes Back, correct?
That's correct. And we're really looking forward to getting to that one. I was just watching it little bit ago, we went to and saw Empire Strikes Back in concert. They had San Diego Symphony performing it out by the bay, and they'd show the movie and that they would provide the soundtrack. And there was just so much, even though I've seen this film so many times, I took so many more things away from it. And we were excited to discuss, and we'll be doing that here in just a couple weeks once you come back from your vacation, Rob. And we look forward to you coming along with us on this journey. We've already broken down all the prequel trilogy, as well as the standalone film, Solo: A Star Wars Story, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, and we are now in the midst of the original trilogy, moving on into the sequel trilogy eventually, and leading up to, of course, The Rise of Skywalker. And if you ever want to find our podcast, the best place to do it is on our own website, HyperionAdventuresPodcast.com. We're also available, of course, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. And if you ever want to contact us socially, we are on Twitter at Hyperion Podcast, Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Hyperion Adventures Podcast.
Yeah, and certainly check us out. We're going to be posting some stuff on Instagram while we're out there at Disneyland doing Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And I'm also going to be getting some videos, so I'm going to look at putting some of that up on YouTube and possibly some of the other content for the other events that we're going to be partaking in out at Disneyland. So if you have an interest in anything related to the Disney parks, I am going to get a channel up and going on YouTube where we can post some of that. But otherwise, we will look forward to catching up with you all next week, which would be the week of the 21st. And other than that, hope you guys have a great week. And I should mention that we are going to send you out on a little different note this week with the throne room music from episode 4. Thank you so much for listening, and may the Force be with you.